Hey everybody, welcome back to Media Ethics. I hope you had a good week. So let's talk about some things that were done this past week. A couple of changes I made. You know, um, the media ethics section, I guess it's gonna be my long excuse here. Used to be kind of like treated like writing for media. It used to have like a person who was actually basically set the rules and the guidelines and that sort of thing. And lately, I say that since that person left a few years ago, it's changed, and now it's more like a little bit like the Wild West. In fact, I use a different textbook than the others use because I think mine, even though it's older, is like more relevant to what's going on. Um, and more conducive to what I want to teach about, and that is basically ruling and making decisions from the edit boardroom, the leadership room, as opposed to the reporters themselves, for media ethics decisions. So a lot of this kind of been work in progress. Last time I taught media ethics was a couple of years ago, and it was actually right in the thick of the pandemic, and we basically just had to like basically shift our operations. So it was kind of like moving from a classroom to here. And now this first time I've actually taught this told completely asynchronously. Um, but to be fair to you, I mean, you should like know some better. There should be some guidelines that should help you get through some of this stuff and understand what's needed here. So anyway, as far as the discussion point is concerned, I did use. I know this kind of threw people in a bit of a shock, but I am using the attendance counter as basically a chart, basically as now as if you're participating in discussion point, because I have to be honest with you. I mean, I was seeing kind of like weak participation a bit, not so much on the first one, but the second one. And then it picked up after I put the attendance chart up. But you must really understand, please, that with an asynchronous class, you know, it's really better for me for writing for media for that kind of class, where you're actually like training on something with its writing, that sort of thing. But this is a theory class where we're supposed to have like concepts and discussions and come up with ideas and stuff like that. So it's normally I would be like kind of engaging the class back in a back and forth and almost acting like some sort of like a news show host. So we have to do something to basically engage. And I want and sometimes I feel like, I'm speaking to the well, this is sometimes I feel like when you speak asynchronously, it's like, you know, it's tough to because especially because you don't get like the kind of feedback and it doesn't really guide myself in what direction I need to go in. So I felt like as a way to like, especially like in the first half of the semester where literally like there's not a ton of interaction going on, generally speaking, in media ethics, other than what's in the classroom. And until we get the exam, okay, we have to do something basically, make sure that we're engaging. So that's why the attendance counter. And let's go to the shared screen option here. Um, and as I said, we did actually pick up um, on this question, which I didn't go over last week. I probably should have, but as the media's coverage of the Biden administration be ethical, specifically with the revelations of the classified documents, blah blah blah. I believe that the media's coverage of there's Hannah right here has also participated in the latest one. I believe that the media's coverage of the Biden administration, specifically in regards to classified documents, to be ethical because the American public, as well as the nations, has the right to be informed. So I'm basically looking. I'm not necessarily looking for something that is actually very well written and it's engaging. And I know most people came down on the side that they felt that even though like a law has been made by some people in the media that there's been too much made by the Biden administration, but it's still news that he's a public official and it's something that basically we pay tax dollars for these people to do what they have to do for us and to be truthful and to be forthcoming. So we should know about it, whatever scrap of, of information comes out of it. I mean, one person I think actually couched it a bit. Um, Depending on your media source, basically Fox News basically is treated as though it's World War III. So basically, you can kind of come on down on different dividing lines for that. But like I said, I'm just really looking for like some sort of engagement or understanding of basically what you know the questions about and basically your own personal feelings about it. So that'll, because this is in combination with what we're talking about, the readings and the lessons and that sort of thing. I'm hoping to it helps shape your better understanding of like, you know, how the ethical decisions in media, what decisions need to be made, and what is exactly ethical in the media and what is not. Okay, I'm hoping that as we go down the line here, we start to see um answers that kind of like maybe you'll even cite like philosophers or whatever that would kind of help shape your opinion or whatever, or other people in the media we talk about. Okay, so just so you know, our next discussion point is actually going to be related to some of the chapters that we are actually going to be reading. So basically, what I like to talk about, I like to basically say that my approach to teaching basically goes from like macro to micro. So we look at maybe the general ideas of what essentially and who's involved and that sort of thing, and media ethical decisions first, and we kind of break it down to maybe like more microeconomical pieces that who makes these decisions, and who is behind maybe some of the ethical principles that are made that help make these decisions. And now we're going to be looking at basically what essentially are the consequences of the decisions, or what feeds into those decisions in chapters 3 and 4. And a lot of then we're going to enter the area of basically objectivity, I would say, and errors and making mistakes, basically speaking to like the credibility overall of like what people of the media and its handling of its business. Let me go back to sharing the screen. So basically, the next one due February 13th is going to be, are there too many errors in journalism? But what consequences should face the journalists who make them, due February 13th? Okay. And don't forget that we have a discussion point that's still out there, due February 6th. Pick a philosopher and philosophy from chapter 2. Can any of them be applied to what's going on in the media today, due February 6th? Aristotle's doctrine of the golden means is what I was hoping that maybe now you can like kind of impart some of this wisdom that we're getting from the readings, and I can see it. Between two extremes, philosophy applies to the media today. The journalist coverage of the college basketball known as Billy Packer's death. The article includes information about the nature of the death. It touches upon a controversial, racially sensitive remark. And the takeaway from this is the media approach is ethical according to Aristotle's doctrine, because the information, because you might argue like, is that going a little bit too far? Are we kind of like stomping on somebody's grave, in their death? Is that fair? But he did have an apology, and basically it is part of his history. So that's basically essentially what Hannah was arguing there. So basically, is there something very simple, something very straightforward in terms of a response. Now, in the middle of the week, I sent you what you deserved at the beginning, and I apologize for this. It's some sort of a rubric. And to be honest with you, like, again, not getting any guidance here on this, but I'm going with the rubric, the basic philosophy that I've taken for my approach to this since I've been started teaching this like 15 years ago, 16 years ago. And here's our rubric. And by the way, I meant to say that actually, this is actually, as I noted in my note earlier in the week, this is tucked under future classes. I'll put this under week 1, but this is tucked under weeks 3 and 4 where we are now, February 30th to February 13th. Sorry, January 30th to February 13th rubric under truth and objectivity. So what am I expecting in this class? Okay, so there's two. Some of this is also imparted from the imported really from the syllabus, but 2 exams, an oral presentation performed through Zoom. Actually, I should say perform. Actually, it doesn't necessarily perform through Zoom. I should actually change that. I apologize. It's actually performed through a video, and I just happen to notice that error. I apologize for that. You can do it through Zoom if you want, but that's fine. And class participation will comprise your grade. Your grade will not be affected by the course of action you choose in various situations, or whether you come to the same conclusion as the professor, me, but by the effectiveness of your arguments backing up your conclusions you reach in your exams and oral presentation. And those exclusively, and I'll get into that. Answers on exams, which we'll get into once we get closer, which will be 5 essay questions each for the midterm and final. Should be at least 300 words. If you look back at the old blue books when we did those, that was probably about a page, I'd say, page and a half, maybe. In the exams and oral presentation, your opinion, politics, or position on the issue do not matter. You could completely disagree with me on something, but you know, it's if you have an effective argument that I feel like can resonate with people, that works. I once had a class, in-person class, where I had people argue that the Jersey Shore television show was ethical, and then I had people argue that it was not ethical. These were groups, actually, not individuals. And I gave both groups A's because they both argued effectively either way. And to be honest with you, I hated the show, and I'm from the Jersey Shore, so and I think it's unethical, but I felt both arguments were effective. What matters is your ability, as it says here, to back up your argument effectively with a real life example in the media and or with the commentary from a respected source. And again, like I showed you, like the journalism review article I talked about in the last one does spoke to like certain philosophies. Bob Woodward and his philosophy of the journalist should seek the most attainable version of the truth. These are the kinds of like things that I'm looking for in terms of like backing up your opinion or your statement, your hypothesis on a subject. Respected source, critic, or a philosopher. That ones that we discussed in class. Okay. All right. In the oral presentation, you'll prepare an actual case for presentation for the class that will involve an ethical. I put ethnical. Let me change that one. I don't want to like get people the wrong idea there. Geez. And I put that through spell check. Okay. All right. All right. So anyway, an ethical media decision. You will select a case by finding a more current one in the media instead of looking through the textbook. Like we discuss that Firestone case. Find something else, okay? And we'll discuss this more specifically once we get there. Read it thoroughly. Ethical decisions in news, public relations, entertainment, advertising, digital media, and the book industry, while not covered extensively in our text, may be selected for class presentation. Now, here's the big one that you need to know right now, okay? This one. The discussion points will be factored into your class participation grade, but you will not be reviewed or graded on the quality of your work. Okay, yes, I'm just looking for people to participate. That's all. The attendance chart will be used to determine the percentage of your participation discussion point. And get this. Oh, yeah, at least 90% participation. So you don't have to do every one. How about that? Is expected and should help boost, but not guarantee your class participation to A level. And what I mean by that is that I expect you to basically engage, especially if you're having problems. Maybe you're not doing well, maybe you didn't do well in your exam. I expect you to ask questions to basically do better in the class. So I expect some sort of outreach sometime during maybe questions or whatever, something to show me that you're engaged in this class, okay? Some of this rest is basically some of the stuff that's already been covered in the syllabus, your overall grade, how it's broken down, class participation, basically engaging, not just in discussion points, but engaging with me, and maybe if you have questions or whatever. And then, of course, the grading, okay? All right, so that's the rubric for the class, and that's hopefully will provide some sort of a guide for you as we move along here, okay? All right, so let's go now to the chapters, okay, which I told you, actually, I said errors and objectivity. It's actually truth and objectivity are the theme, okay? And what this basically gets to the heart of is basically, like I said, now once we have established like what ethical principles are, we have the Potter's box, which we talked about last week, which is a formula for making ethical decisions. Now we basically like look at like how do we arrive at those decisions specifically. And I would say that truth and objectivity are not just things that are derived from the philosophers or the experts on ethical matters, but also like your gut check, things that everybody I hope would have like some sort of understanding when they're raised by their parents or whatever, adopted parents or whatever, that that truth and objectivity should be a goal whenever you're trying to report information. That you should not really try to basically. I think that's a universally accepted concept that falsehoods is bad. However, there is like some twists on that, okay, that we'll talk about. But this basically talks about what essentially is determined as the truth. There can be some twists in things like mockumentaries and The Onion and the stuff like that on that we'll talk about that could twist the truth a little bit and can be determined as morally acceptable or ethically acceptable. Okay. I mean, they talk about in this chapter about basically like who determines the truth, but what they do is they come up with essentially what are universally accepted ideas for what determines to be the truth. Now we talked about we try to seek the most attainable version of the truth, but how do we interpret truth? And basically, what this chapter does is base it on what the philosophers say and others like Einstein, that sort of thing. The way to understand the world is to observe it closely and to classify and analyze what is seen. Okay. So basically, like that goes to what the Socratic method, just to try to research as much as possible, determine what you think is the truth. Make sure that what is told to you, that you can basically, if you have any kind of question on it, is to basically research it to find out whether it's the internet or whatever, credible sources, books, whatever, to back that up. Okay. Facts and opinions are separate things, and facts are the basis of truth. Something I talk a lot about in writing for media, actually, and it's interesting because I always say to people, is a bad president. Joe Biden is a bad president. There's actually a true statement. There's a factual statement there. Okay, I mean, I'm quoting my father here. Okay, let's say because he's a Republican, whatever, but whatever. A lot of people don't like him, but let's just say I'm quoting my father. Okay, so there's actually like a true statement being said here. Okay, and which one would it be? Well, it's this one, because it's not this that's necessarily the truthful part. It's this part. My father has said this. I know this to be true. So this is the truthful part of the statement. Okay. This is the opinion. So basically, like in journalism, especially, you want to make sure that you back up what you say, you footnote what you say, and you basically source what you say. And that's basically one of the best ways to determine the difference between truth and opinion. Okay. And you have to make clear the distinction between the two. Okay. I've kind of caught myself a little bit in a bit of a, there we go. All right. People can objectively obtain facts. For example, a scientist can be trusted to read a thermometer and record a temperature correctly. But of course, a lot about science has actually come under question recently, especially with the vaccines and that sort of thing. And basically, that goes to the whole ethical dilemma. What's the universally accepted truth? Sometimes you just have to maybe when you determine like what's truth in media, you have to go with maybe what's universally accepted. I realize there are some scientists out there who have made statements about vaccines that are, and they're not 100% perfect. We know that, but maybe like the way to go is basically what again goes back to what we talked about in terms of like the universally accepted definition of ethics. Okay, what's the universally accepted version of truth? And usually it's what the scientists have told us. The scientific developments are making the world a better place. Well, we'd like to think that's true. So that's how basically the truth is determined. Now, this chapter gets into a bit about like, how reporters, they don't, one of the problems with like getting to that truth is they don't seek the most obtainable version of the truth, is they fall often short of that. Okay. And there's probably no better example of that than the recent election of, so you should, that's always be the goal, is to try to seek the most obtainable version of the truth. But there's probably no example of that than this coverage involving George Santos, the congressman from Long Island, who apparently had a lot of lies on his record. And, there's even been talk about like, as you see some of these headlines here, they're interviewing people, there's an investigation, and he got elected. But the thing was that the people who really should be doing the investigation in the first place were the journalists, there's been a lot of talk about how journalists really fell down on the job because they didn't question the fact that he had all these things going on in his life that didn't happen, or I should say it differently. There are all these different things that he said didn't happen, but were reported as true. Okay. So that was a major example. And whenever that kind of happened, when the media doesn't do its research, that's a fail. That's an ethical fail. As going back again to the Socratic method. And again, we could go to like maybe certain experts who have talked about this. And this is actually Maggie Haberman, who is she is a New York Times reporter who often comments on this sort of thing. And this is the kind of person you could use as maybe like a backup if you're trying to argue a certain case, whether the media handle it correctly. And this is basically talking about how the local media in particular, probably my old job Patch, my old company, fell down on the job.
Make the tougher choice, which is, I think, look, own every lie that he's made, apologize to everyone and anyone for as long as it takes.
I just try to
Maggie Haberman, Errol Lewis, who actually interviewed George Santos. Listen, so as I was off, the only thing that I paid attention to was this story, and this is what everybody is talking about. Good morning to you guys. Happy New Year to you. So my one question is, how did this happen? How did this happen?
We're all used to seeing public officials who shade the truth, lie, and so forth. So this is a whole other, dimension. This is a different order of magnitude. He invented almost every single thing about it. I mean, from his name to his, like almost everything, his work life, his education life, his mother's life, his grandparents' life, his immigrant story, on and on and on, all just completely invented. And so it's a little bit unusual to run into somebody like that. And we don't have a system, even the informal parts of our system, media vetting, opposition research, party mechanisms, and so forth. We don't really have great mechanisms for trapping or
Maggie, by the way, works for the New York Times.
Catching something like this because it doesn't happen very often.
At the same time, usually there is one mechanism that will catch something, right? There's the media, there's the rival opponents, there's the national Republicans, and then there's the local Republicans. And I don't think that's getting talked enough about, which is what exactly Republicans, who saw this guy run 2 years ago. What were they aware of? What were they willing to tolerate in the hopes that they could see how far it would go in this climate? And the other thing we've never really seen is silence like this from leadership. And as you see Kevin McCarthy in the middle of his own battle to stay alive in leadership and to become the next speaker, he has been incredibly quiet about this, in part because he needs every vote. There is no reason to believe Santos is not going to get seated. I believe he is going to get seated, and then these investigations will continue.
Constitutionally, he has.
Right. And so McCarthy, there's no mechanism in the House for getting rid of him. I think that's something that people haven't really understood. And it's going, there can be a law enforcement effort to get rid of him. And I think we're going to see focuses on that. But I can't remember any time where there has been, even a fraction of this and leadership has been so quiet in either party.
Yeah. This is some of the quietest, just as you say. It's the Constitution says if you're 25 years old and you've been in the state, you've been in the country as a citizen for 7 years, and you live in the state, and tell everybody exactly what it is they want to hear, and then we have to figure out. And honestly, look, we have a system that the justice system is cranking up. We've got an attorney general. We've got federal prosecutors.
For a lot of people, usually just worked for Trump. You think it's going to work for George Santos?
Oh, he's going to be seated. And I think that then we're going to see what happens with these investigations. I think Errol was right to make the point that, lying is not new in American culture, and it's certainly not new in politics, but not to this extent. We have never seen, we were talking about this in the green room. I can't think of a precedent for this. I have covered politicians who have lied to me, lied to voters. They've padded their resumes. We've never seen something like this. And I don't think that you would have seen silence like this as you have in the pre-Trump. I don't think you would have seen this level of sort of just ride it out and see what happens. But everything is about party tribalism now, and that's a lot of what we're seeing.
Can you guys give us? I'm telling you, this is the thing that everybody's talking about. Give us a little bit more time with the segment because I want to ask you. You are a member. You cover politics in New York.
Markets rise and markets fall.
Like this.
I live out on Long Island. I covered this story. What happened to the local media that it didn't catch all of these lies or were not interested enough, or I don't know. You tell me.
No, I asked that question. There's at least a paper, I believe, in Oyster Bay that actually did catch some of this and did publish some of it. But the way things work is that it's got to be sort of moved up the chain. You know, I mean, I'm based in New York City, Spectrum News. A small piece of this district is in New York City, so we sort of paid some attention to it, please. But it wasn't our thing. We said, well, we'll let the newspapers and the folks out in Long Island, they'll have the main piece of it. And, you know, a local paper did, but it didn't get moved up to, say, I don't know, News 12 or whatever the local cable station is. And then, you know, you have the big network affiliates who are covering the metro area, which is all of New York City, plus a little piece of Long Island. So it wasn't anybody in particular's job. And it was only really after the New York Times focused on it. It just happened to be after the election that you started to get the investigative resources and the sort of the breadth and the reach. And so this is, you know, another chapter in the long-standing tragedy of the collapse or the decline of local news.
It is that, because the reality is that, you know, especially in this sort of attrited news environment, congressional races are rarely treated as top priorities unless they are sort of marquee races. And I think that this is an example of where it just basically fell through the cracks. I don't think it's a great excuse for any of us, but I do think that it is largely a death of local media story.
What does Kevin McCarthy do?
There you have it. And believe it's like lazy reporting is what it's just basically saying. And why I didn't move up to News 12 or whatever, I don't know. But the unthinking reporter, the unthinking editor, that Oyster Bay paper should have reported on it. Should have heard it. They should have reported on it. They compare it to the Joe McCarthy era, who was the congressman who basically made a big deal. I believe it was a senator who was calling everyone a communist back in the 50s and everything, and they called it McCarthyism, and basically how his lies were just kind of allowed to let stand. And it took like a President Eisenhower to finally call them out on it, and maybe some reporters eventually. But anytime you hear anything from somebody, you really should basically always again, Socratic method, just to research and make sure what's being said is as true as possible. Okay. There's also but that also can be kind of parsed in different ways, and then there's and one of the casualties, I guess, I think that's talked about when we talk about truth is that there's also out of context, and out of context is often misinterpreted as a truth that's just slightly untrue. But anything out of context, or anything that basically is presented in a way that's not universally accepted, isn't necessarily a truth. Okay. And one of the things that we're seeing now is the side effect of balanced stories, and what's being called is both siderism. Trying that and the book talks about this, the problems with balance, especially in today's day and age, when we see things like the January 6th insurrection, and we see people talking about, and I have to talk about Fox News, I'm sorry, but Fox News try to present there's another side to basically storming the Capitol and a few people dying, when to be honest with you, I think there's times when there's you should try to achieve both sides to an issue, but on the other hand, maybe there isn't both sides to an issue. Maybe there's a universally accepted truth to it, that one side is right and one side is wrong. So maybe there's events that happen that shouldn't be presented that way. That's one of the questions that says, is the question of objectivity. Objectivity is often tied to balance. Objectivity really is just a matter of just really trying to remove yourself from a situation as much as possible, and basically reporting it as clearly and as objectively as possible. This talks maybe a little dated with the blogs, because blogs are sometimes, the media is so parsed out right now that some things are just treated, there's so many sources for news out there, and then of course you got the social media and that sort of thing, that they're treated as fact. And we saw those problems arise in a 2016 election and even a 2020 election, and so many things were said about Hillary Clinton were treated as fact, that even the claims made about that she was hiding some sort of a pedophilia organization or something like that. So there's so many different things out there. So we're seeing a problem with lack of reporting on the one hand, especially in the George Santos case, or the reporters aren't going far enough. And then we're seeing cases where reporters are just going too far, where they essentially go into like areas where there's maybe too many sources out there reporting things as true when when they're actually being opinionated and analytical and that sort of thing. And Fox, I have to admit, okay, I'm not necessarily taking a political side here, but Fox is often viewed as being that kind of a source. That we used to have like 3 networks and that was it, but now we have a bunch of different places to go for news. We have 4 networks, and then we have the news channels on top of that. And MSNBC also presents itself as a factual news network, but they also go into the opinionated side. But what this chapter talks about is that's like, is that truth or is that or is that just opinion? And again, you have to determine the difference between truth and opinion, the facts and opinion. Is being objective being truthful? If you remove yourself from the situation, yes, but is being balanced being truthful? Well, I don't know, because basically one side may be totally incorrect. There was actually a media critic by the name of Eric Bull. He actually just passed away, but he was actually somebody who talked about that, about the problem with what's called as both siderism. And let's hear what he has to say about that.
Let's talk about the both sides idea. First of all, what is that, Eric, and how commonplace do you think it is?
So both sides journalism is an absolute hallmark of the Beltway press, and it's become a pejorative probably in the last 10 years because for many decades it seemed to work fine. So if you're on Capitol Hill, if you're covering politics, your job is to reflect the 2 parties, right? For decades, it was basically a center-left party versus a center-right party. They were somewhat similar in terms of where they were kind of mere opposites in terms of where they were situated on the political spectrum. So if you did a story, any political story, you went to both sides. What do Republicans think? What do Democrats think? It's pretty straightforward. That becomes your product, your content, your journalism. And like I said, I think for a long time it worked really well because the press kind of prizes this idea of independence and being bipartisan and being savvy enough to watch these right-left battles unfold and to be able to cover them fairly. And to cover them fairly, you have to figure out what both sides are saying. The problem is the Republican Party has changed so radically, really in the last 10 years. I would say it started under Obama and for lots of reasons. And so both sides has become a pejorative because they're not similar. The Republican Party today is waging war on free and fair elections. They spent most of last year denying the pandemic existed. You have congressmen openly lying about a miraculously safe and efficient vaccine today during a public health crisis. This is not a center-right party. This has become a much more radical and dangerous enterprise. But the press really wants to hang on to this center-right, center-left. All we have to do is get quotes from both sides. And because both sides act similarly. So, just to piggyback on this, a hypothetical COVID or vaccine story. Yesterday, CNN put up a piece basically saying McCarthy and Republicans want to run on COVID. They want to run on this backlash against the mask. They think it's a political winner. But Democrats say, it's irresponsible. So, there you have kind of both sides. But, CNN shouldn't have to rely on the Democratic Party to conclude that lying about a vaccine is irresponsible, right? You don't have to do that. You can make that judgment on your own. But journalists are so nervous about the allegation of liberal media bias. And we can talk about the 5-decade crusade that has been. They're so nervous about that allegation. I think they go out of their way not to draw obvious conclusions that they can, whether it's about an insurrection, whether about trying to overturn election results, whether it's about this the scare campaign now in terms of the COVID and things like that. So both sides is basically a relic from a way Beltway journalism used to work, and I would say it worked fine for the times. But the times have changed. The Republican Party has become, in my view, a very radical and dangerous enterprise, and the press is still covering it like it's a mainstream party, and they're still covering it by suggesting anything unusual or out of character or controversial the Republican Party does. Democrats probably do the same thing, and then
Anyway, I think you got the point. And, you know, I mean, like I said, I'm not trying to necessarily draw political lines here, but I mean, when you have like one party that maybe try to use as an insurrection, that's not necessarily, you know, something that maybe be a universally accepted truth. Okay. You know, it's interesting because like it's not often like there are times though when these different outlets or whatever, you know, they get caught in their manipulation or their lack of objectivity. And I want to show you actually something that comes from moving to chapter 4 here. And basically, and it kind of connects to what this chapter talks about, and that's errors. Okay, now errors basically like, you know, are essentially determined as mistakes. That's the first thing you think of. But errors also, like I said, can be determined as things that are put out of context, or maybe like statements that are made that maybe like it could be like opinion, but maybe lack research. So there's like different shades of errors in a way, and that reporters really have to be careful with if they're trying to really truly be the balanced, objective, truthful, you know, disseminators of information. You know, one of the things that's talked about, like, you know, mistakes is that, like, you know, one thing you should know is that basically it's okay for actually like reporters to actually, and we're supposed to talk about specifically traditional media now, but not just that, but also in an entertainment business and that sort of thing, they do report information and maybe they like manipulate the truth or whatever, or they make just a mistake about it. And you know, if it's an innocent mistake, that sort of thing, then it's usually universally accepted that it's okay because basically people who provide this information are human and maybe they just didn't get it right, or maybe they misheard it or whatever. And those types of things happen. In fact, there was even a Supreme Court case, Times v. Sullivan, that helped determine that, because before Times v. Sullivan, 1964, it was the New York Times versus Sullivan, who was a bigoted sheriff, I believe it was, in the South. He was upset because he was named as a racist in an advertisement in the New York Times, who was out to get Martin Luther King or something like that. So he was upset about that, but basically that was somebody's opinion in a news story that could be considered a mistake, but the libel case didn't fly because basically it wasn't committed with malicious intent or reckless disregard of the truth. So you can make a mistake, but basically without reckless disregard for the truth, this is determined not just as a universally accepted truth, but also as a Supreme Court decision. Reckless disregard of the truth and or malicious intent. Okay. You know, how many mistakes? I mean, what reporters really, or anybody should really worry about when they make mistakes in any kind of like media, is that they should worry about credibility. That's actually the main thing they have to worry about. Okay. And that goes to like the social contract that Hobbes talked about, is that they're predominantly, especially in the news media, is that they expect some sort of obtainable version of the truth. And you know, if you stick to that, that's good. But if you don't, you know, even if it's a human error, though, you still want to be careful. Okay, reckless disregard of the truth means that you're just totally reckless, but you also want to be careful too. There's another side to that too, and being a little careless is not good either. Okay, you want to basically like establish credibility so people will believe you. Okay. I always like, whenever I think of that, I always think of this in terms of like Fox News and like, oh, by the way, this is actually something else I wanted to show about both sides journalism. And this is an article I could actually share, but basically traditional journalism leaves many stories untold or incomplete. Researchers investigate alternative models of journalism that aim for inclusivity and combat, like I say, racism in the media. And basically, it talks about both sides reporting. Why did it become a standard practice in journalism? It stems from traditional practice in journalism, objectivity, balance, that preferred its belief. However, that is not how the idea of both sides was developed over time. Okay. Now you got this whole situation with like people claiming fake news, and it comes from people like the president of the United States, Donald Trump, who was the president of the United States, and now people who are basically believed to be like providing like maybe just their opinion or maybe their own or maybe some version of the truth are now basically spreading lies. So that's not necessarily a good example of like somebody, or that's not a good way of trying to achieve balance if somebody just trying to spread lies. Okay. This was actually, anyway, going back to errors and that sort of thing. Here's like basically like example where maybe like errors are made and maybe it's like it's just like a reckless disregard of the truth. But it's more than that. It's different from that. Maybe it's just carelessness, or maybe there is malicious intent involved here, but it's also like it also speaks to maybe there's some carelessness on the part of the newsmaker, which was Fox News. And it goes back to this debate when basically they were it was Sean Hannity, who was a commentator on Fox News, used to have a partner named Alan Combs, and it was called Hannity and Combs. And Hannity was basically ripping into Obama and his ties to like certain people in his life and that sort of thing. He felt were radical, and he was relying on Hannity was relying on certain people who this person called out as basically not being reliable people to question Obama's credibility and truthfulness. Okay, so let's look at what's being said here.
Why would you sit on a board? Would you sit on a board that a guy that bombed the Pentagon and wasn't sorry about it?
Charitable board, and a board funded by a conservative Republican and a friend of
Speaking about Obama.
Ronald
Was that
Reagan.
poor judgment?
That was Walter Annenberg.
I didn't ask you, was that poor judgment on Obama's
poor
part?
judgment at all. I think what Barack Obama's done throughout his career is talk about the big issues that are important to him.
All right, you give me a spin now. I'm asking you.
Let me ask you one question.
All right, you asked me a question.
Okay. Are you anti-Semitic?
Not at all.
Okay. On your show on Sunday, you're the show that's named after you, right? The centerpiece of that show was a guy named Andy Martin.
No, I know you're reading your talking points.
No,
When I interviewed, hang on, I'm going to answer your question. When I interviewed Malik Shabazz, when I interviewed Al Sharpton,
Right.
when I interviewed all these controversial figures, you see on Fox, we actually interview people of all points of view, whether we agree or disagree.
So
The statement you're about to read,
Andy Martin called the judge a crooked,
I
slimy
totally,
Jew
completely.
who has a history of lying and thieving, common to
Here's my
members of his
answer to you.
race. Martin went on to write that he understood better why the Holocaust took place, given that Jew survivors are
Here's my
operating
answer
as a
to you.
wolf pack.
I find those comments despicable. But wait a minute.
Put it on your show.
We put
It's
Malik
the
Shabazz on the show.
It's
I
the
put Khalid
Hannity
Muhammad
show.
on my show.
Why am I
put-
not to believe that
Here's
you're
my-
anti-Semitic?
Here's
Why am I not to believe that everybody
here's
who
the
works for the
answer.
network is anti-Semitic?
here's-
Because Sean Hannity
Mr.
gives the
Gibbs,
platform to
Mr.
somebody
Gibbs,
who thinks
Mr.
Jews
Gibbs,
are
I'm a
slimy.
journalist who interviews people that I disagree with all the
I think when somebody makes remarks like that and like makes remarks about the Holocaust is not universal truth and not should be considered as somebody who should be used in research. Anyway, so it's all about social contracts. So I mean, Fox News might argue that like, look, and then speaking of the carelessness, the book talks about that and sloppiness. Fox News might have a social contract basically that with its audience, which you could also consider ethical in some ways, because they expect conservative opinions as basically their news. So you could argue that as something as ethical. And when I talk about like using one of the effective arguments, I always say it's one way to present an effective argument maybe on an exam and that sort of thing is to show something you don't believe in and try to argue against that. So basically that's what he was essentially doing there, was that he was showing that what he was putting up there was something he disagreed with, and this is why. His name was Robert Gibbs. He was the guy who was presenting the argument about this source being anti-Semitic. So anyway, so that's an example of basically just not somebody doing their due diligence, I would say. Um, the typical mistake, you have people in this case, like Jason Blair was a reporter for the New York Times who just got things wrong, was lazy basically on a lot of his reporting, and basically just actually totally made up stuff. And what you have here essentially is like, um, you actually have a correct, you actually plagiarized the story, so that'd be like a complete error. And this is typically how when there is an error made, your organizations like the New York Times will basically print something sort of like a correction or something like that. But you could argue, like, I mean, both ways in that they took the ethical approach in handling that by putting like some sort of correction on it. But then again, the New York Times also perhaps was unethical, and I talked about this last week, by allowing this guy to continue to do his job the way he did, and making mistakes and that sort of thing, and making up facts and that sort of thing. Okay, so my question to you would be: is that more ethical than what Fox News is doing? Might be able to argue that either way, because Fox News is known to basically have a contract with its audience to present it in a certain way. The New York Times is a contract with its audience, present things in a way that's always going to be truthful. Okay. So who's right, who's wrong there in terms of ethics there? I mean, that's where maybe you can base your decisions. Something to think about maybe when you do your oral presentations. And then one of the things that's made about like this is that a lot of times people argue that these credible newspapers, news organizations, they take an unethical approach when all they do is like clarify or make or correct the mistake by putting it at the bottom of the story. It's already out there and people are already believing this stuff. But does this actually like erase everything, all the wrongdoing that was done, everything that wrong that was done by just putting something at the bottom of a story? And look at this. This story is actually still on the internet. It probably should have been taken down. So that sort of thing. And here's another question. The New York Times is making a mistake. Is that more credible than this? This is actually like some of the old tabloids that used to like just print stuff as bogus, but people had a general understanding that this stuff was bogus. Okay. Is this more credible is this more ethical than what the New York Times is doing? The New York Times is an audience that basically expects everything that it produces to be true. This is like, now a lot of people might actually believe this to be true, so maybe you could argue that's unethical. But I think that there's a universal acceptance that this kind of stuff that they report is untrue. Okay. Hillary Clinton adopts alien baby. Okay. That's not true. Okay. Bat child escapes. Okay. So there's a certain universally accepted belief that this is not, it's basically, it's a mock. Okay. Or even like some sort of a satire. Okay. The Onion is that way. It basically mocks a lot of what's said. What was done. Oh, exclusive interview with George Santos, which is probably completely made up. But again, they have a social contract with their audience that basically it said that what they're presenting is not true. Okay. And apparently it's some sort of a slideshow, but anyway. I finally made the switch from coffee, says man holding gun to head. Get adrenaline, it's a little sick humor. Stuff like that. Cop confused after pouring fentanyl on wife doesn't do anything. Okay. The Onion looks back on the quarterback to lose 3 Super Bowls. That's what Tom Brady just retired. That sort of thing. So yeah. So basically, what's more ethical, that New York Times or that? You could argue that maybe like because the Onion consistently does things that mock and is satire, that maybe they're more ethical on a regular basis than perhaps the New York Times is, because the New York Times makes errors in the story when they should never do that. Okay. Okay. Just basically, they based some other examples here about basically like news organizations like CNN basically not doing enough due diligence on their stories, and how, especially in this day and age, you have a situation where now, I mean, it's an excuse. It doesn't necessarily make it right, but it has become a lot more difficult for like these news organizations to do the right thing when there's been so much reductions in staff and that sort of thing. I mean, it's interesting is that there are so many different news organizations out there. So there are a lot more people actually doing reporting and that sort of thing. But, but the major newspapers have actually cut their staff and they don't have, not doing the same kind of research they used to do or same amount. Lack of diversity in newsrooms, that's something we've talked about for a really long time, is that there's people with different cultural experiences who see things through a different lens. And I remember with the Press of Atlantic City, when I worked there back in the 90s, there was the Black community felt that the newspaper was not doing enough to report about the good things that were happening in the community. And they're reporting too much on the bad things that were happening in the community, and that Black people were too often associated with those things. What's the universally accepted truth there? Well, I would agree with the Black community that they weren't doing enough due diligence to cover all the things that were going on in the community, that they were going for the sensationalistic crap, that the murders and everything else that were happening that were, and they needed to present. That's the kind of balance you want to have in reporting. That's the kind of like both siderism that actually is right, that you want to present everything that's happening. You want to present the crime, but you also want to present the good things that are happening, the good things that all different cultural communities are doing. And maybe the lack of diversity in newsrooms is one of the reasons why that hasn't happened enough, and it's still a problem, I would say. I look at my newsroom at Best Review, and I don't see like any people of color, as that's a term I don't like to use, but that's mistakes cause hardships. Again, that credibility is an issue, and it's more so than ever being sued. And then this part of the book also talks about, like, basically ways the media can improve itself so they avoid this kind of situation. Question persistently. Okay, reporters should have fired persistent questions at would-be sources. How do you know that? Do you see it? Who told you this? Are you 100% sure this could happen? Basically keep asking that question till you get that most obtainable version of the truth. Be upfront about verification. Basically we have people who whenever we have a name that's actually like used in our stories, that sort of thing, we do is we Google it and we make sure that it actually is spelled correctly and that the reporter used the correct title. Okay. Correct mistakes prominently. I mean, yes, I know those corrections are pretty small. You want to make sure that you're actually owning up to it, even if it is small. Use exact attribution. We talked about that. I mean, if it's as a statement's made, even if it's a falsehood that's being made, you want to make sure it's being attributed to somebody. And don't rush. Okay. I mean, it's always important to be right before being first. Okay. You don't want to I know in today's media, you basically have the situation where everything's 24/7, but you don't want to be in a situation where you're rushing things just because you want to be the first person there. That's not going to help your credibility. Fast does help with credibility, but not being wrong. Okay. All right. So I think we covered everything there. Okay. We have more readings that are on the list that we'll talk about next week. And again, remember that all of those are actually posted already. We've been I may have you all reading up to chapters 9, but I'm going full again with the flow of things. We actually next readings will be chapters 5 and 6. That'll that were due on February 6th. And then on February 13th will be chapter 7. Okay, I expect you to read by then too, but I'll be going over chapters 5 and 6 in the next lecture. Okay. All right. So thanks very much, everybody. And I will be talking to you.